So here's what we're going to do. Unsealing of the scroll of Revelation chapter 5. We've got the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and we're going to look at the Old Testament passages and images in the terrible events that follow the opening of these seals. So we're focused on John's use of the Old Testament to describe God's eschatological. When I say eschatological, do you know what I mean? End time. It's the end time judgment on the world. Revelation chapter 6. We're going to be looking at verses 1 through 8. Here at first, it says, "Now I watched, and when the Lamb opened one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures say with a voice like thunder, 'Come!' And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, 'Come!' And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another. And he was given a great sword. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, 'Come!' And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, 'A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. But do not harm the oil and wine.' When he opened the fourth seal, I heard a voice of the fourth living creature say, 'Come!' And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth." All right. So this is the unsealing of the scroll. And we've got some familiar things here, like you're seeing things here that we already know what he's talking about. You've got the Lamb. It's both a sacrificial metaphor image and a conquering king, a warring image. You've got the living creatures. What are they? It's this combination, cherubim, the seraphim. They're holding up the divine throne in the heavens over the constellations. We looked at that astral prophecy earlier. These cherubim, seraphim figures come from Revelation chapter 4 and 5. We've got death and Hades. That goes back to chapter 1 and chapter 3. So there's some familiar stuff here. But there's also a bit of a twist here as well. So we're going to start with the obvious stuff. Verse 1, the Lamb opened one of the seals. All right, one of our scholars, Un, says, okay, lambs can't open scrolls. Their hooves just won't do it. So what we have here is a lamb that's superimposed on an originally anthropomorphic figure. So this group of 4 visions in 6, 1 through 8 is structured using the 4 cherubim. Each of the cherubim summons one of the 4 horsemen which afflict the world with a variety of plagues. So we're going to agree with Un that John, he's actually looking at Jesus, but he calls him a lamb. And he's using this language of the lamb. And in the gospel, John the Baptist says, he looks at Jesus, sees him coming down to the river, to the Jordan. He says, the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. So it's not a vision. He literally saw Jesus. I think John saw in his vision Jesus. So he sees Jesus as human, but he calls him the Lamb. All right, Beale writes this. These first 8 verses are intended to show that suffering, remember these people are under persecution. They're going to suffer. Many are going to lose their lives. They're going to be martyred. We're going to get to that here in a minute. That this suffering does not occur indiscriminately or by chance. Okay, that's an important thought. Because who holds the key to death and Hades? Jesus. Always the right answer. All right, Jesus, the risen Christ, holds the key to death and Hades. He went down, pop, 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 took them. So the destructive events are brought about by Christ for both redemptive purposes and for judicial purposes. Remember that lamb metaphor works both ways, a sacrificial metaphor and a conquering king metaphor. So the command for the 4 destructive horses and riders, it originates from the throne room where Christ, the lamb, opens each seal. So a cherubim issues commands to the horsemen in response to the opening of the seal, and only then do the horsemen wreak their havoc. So who's the one launching the war here? Jesus. That may be a theme we repeat over and over. All right, so that's the bottom line. Jesus is the one who initiates the final battle of gods and men. But we don't often think of Jesus that way. You know, I referenced that movie Talladega Nights. Ricky Bobby, it's Thanksgiving, they're around the table, and he's praying, and he's like, praise to sweet baby Jesus. And I like that Jesus better than the big one. Yeah. A lot of people are going to like sweet baby Jesus better than this one. Okay, remember back in chapter 5? There we talked about how the lamb imagery works 2 ways. We think lamb, sacrificial victim. We think Old Testament Jewish culture. But it was also used, as I've already said, of the gods and of rule and of power and of might. So there's 2 sides to the metaphor. Lamb, sacrificial metaphor, and conquering rule. Now, scholars noted the most obvious Old Testament source for these first 8 verses is Zechariah chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. I lifted my eyes and saw 4 chariots. Okay, note chariots, not horsemen, came out from between 2 mountains. The first chariot had red horses, the second black horses, the third white horses, and the fourth chariot dappled horses, all of them strong. And the angel answered and said to me, these are going out to the 4 winds of heaven. Do they go out at the same time? What do you think? Are those 4 horses going out at the same time? Or are they going out one and then months, years later, sometime later, another one, then months later, another one? No, they're going out at the same time, aren't they? All right, these are going out to the 4 winds of heaven after presenting themselves before the Lord of all the earth. The chariot with the black horses goes to the north country, while the white one goes after them, and the dappled one goes toward the south country. Okay, virtually all Old Testament scholars acknowledge that there is a relationship between the 4 horses of Zechariah 6, which they link back to the team of horses in Zechariah chapter 1. It's like, got to weave this thing in. We got to connect the dots. So the steps go this way. We're reading Revelation chapter 6. Okay, that takes my mind back to Zechariah chapter 6. And the precedent to Zechariah chapter 6 is Zechariah chapter 1. So the question is, what is the relationship between Revelation 6, Zechariah 6, and Zechariah 1? And how do we reconcile the different colors? Because the horses are different colors in Revelation 6 with the ones in Zechariah 6. And how do we go from 3 chariot teams in Zechariah 1 to 4 in Zechariah 6? And then to 4 individual horses in Revelation chapter 6? Well, if you want to do some homework on your own, commentators have reconciled this. They've figured out ways to do that, but we're not going to cover that in this course. It's been done. You can go check it out. But I want to give you 4 general observations about this text. The scenes in Zechariah 1 and 6 include an angel figure that we earlier argued is probably the angel of Yahweh. Okay, we ran into this when we covered Revelation chapter 1, verse 4. And we said we can't be 100% certain, but we can make a very strong case for it. And that's going to matter when we look at this stuff in Revelation. So in Revelation chapter 6, the four horsemen are unleashed from God's throne room, which is an integral element of the divine council scene in Revelation 4 and 5. Third thing, the four horses correspond to the four corners of the earth. So what it's saying, north, south, east, west, the whole shebang, the whole earth is going to be impacted here. The seals are global in impact, not just Israel, not just Jerusalem, global. All right, back to the language of Zechariah 6. These guys are patrolling. Well, the commentators say, they're going out with a little more purpose than just patrolling in Revelation. So what John says about these plagues, the warfare, and the death, it's not inconsistent with Zechariah 6. All right, fourth thing, the horses in Zechariah are actually chariot teams. Okay, so the use in the Old Testament, it's chariot teams. Well, what were chariots in an Old Testament context? They were instruments of war. Sending chariots implied something violent, or it implied judgment, because this is an instrument of war. So, the Zechariah passage, this Old Testament passage in Zechariah, is about God avenging his people. God punishing the nations that are oppressing his people. So the chariot teams, they're sent out to punish the nations that are oppressing God's people. And that is perfectly in concert with Revelation chapter 6. We just read the letters where Jesus is telling us, where he's commanding us, endure to the end. Conquer, overcome, remain steadfast. The Lord knows those who are persecuting you. He's not going to forget that. The Lord is not going to let this persecution, this suffering of his people pass without judging those who are the oppressors. Now in Revelation chapter 6, we have the Lamb unleashing judgment on the world. So the four corners equals the whole world by means of the four horsemen. They're going to those who are oppressing, those who are persecuting, the ones who follow the Lamb, who are persecuting believers. All right, remember Revelation chapter 5? The martyrs who get those white robes. All right, this is very much a day of the Lord kind of feel here. The Lord is going to avenge his own. He's going to avenge believers. He's going to avenge his saints, his holy ones, the church. So we're going to look at some old things. We're going to look at some new things. Things that tie Jesus into the one who destroys. Do you think of Jesus that way? The one who takes life, who destroys? We've already looked at some of this stuff, so I'm going to rehearse. I'm going to go back and rehash it. Here's the old stuff we already talked about. All right. So if the figure in Zechariah among the myrtles, remember the myrtle trees, with these chariot teams is in fact the angel of the Lord, or angel of Yahweh, and I'm saying it is. If that's the case, then that would align Jesus, the angel, to Jesus. So Jesus is the angel of Yahweh. Who is Yahweh? Who is Jesus? Remember chapter 1, all these designations of the Ancient of Days applied to Jesus. Then we had the commander of the Lord's army, the angel of the Lord, the word, the name, all these things applied to Jesus. So the angel of Yahweh did in fact wreak destruction on God's enemies in the Old Testament. The angel with the drawn sword in his hand, Joshua 5, to precipitate the conquest of Joshua's day. The angel in 1 Chronicles 21 that assaults Jerusalem. So in Joshua 5 and 1 Chronicles 21, the figure there is the angel of the Lord, the captain of the Lord's host. And they're the same entity. The key phrase is the drawn sword in the hand. We covered this once before. We're reviewing here. That phrase is used only 3 times in the Hebrew Bible. The other 2, besides Joshua 5, are absolutely clearly the angel of the Lord passages. So you have this divine warrior figure. All right, here's the new stuff. Heiser, in his book Angels, loops in other passages, including the destroyer at Passover. All right, it's clear from both passages, Joshua 5, 1 Chronicles 21, that the angel of Yahweh is in view and that he brings destruction. Okay, Mashit is a term used in Chronicles 21. This is the identical term used to describe the angel of death in the account of the death of the firstborn on the eve of the first Passover in Exodus 12, 13, 21, and 23. This term, Mashit, there we go. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy. There's the word Mashit, to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Then Moses said to them, select lambs for yourselves, kill the Passover lamb, for the Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptians. When he sees the blood on the lintel of the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer, the Mashit, to enter your houses to strike you. So the Mashit, 1 Chronicles 21, same word, was the angel of Yahweh in 1 Chronicles 21. Here is distinguished from Yahweh by the line, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the second person, the destroyer. So the Lord, Yahweh, passes over and does not allow the destroyer, the Mashit, to enter your house to strike you. So we clearly have 2 separate figures, Yahweh and the destroyer. Got that? Got Yahweh, he will pass over and not allow the destroyer, a second person entity, to enter the house. Yet we read elsewhere that it was Yahweh himself who destroyed the firstborn. So Yahweh is the destroyer, and you have this blending here where the destroyer is, but he isn't Yahweh, because there's 2. What do you think I'm referring here when I say there's 2 what? 2 powers! One visible, one invisible. Yeah. So it's the two powers thing going on. Here's passages that loop Yahweh into this. All right. Psalm 105, 26 and 36. He sent Moses, his servant, and Aaron, whom he had chosen. He struck down all the firstborn in their land. The he is Yahweh, the first fruits of their strength. Psalm 135, 5. For I know that the Lord, Yahweh, is great, and that our Lord, Yahweh, is above all gods. He it was who struck down the firstborn of Egypt, both of man and beast. Psalm 136. Give thanks to the Lord, Yahweh of lords, for his steadfast love endures forever. To him, Yahweh, who struck down the firstborn of Egypt, for his steadfast love endures forever. So it sure looks like Yahweh is the destroyer, and that Yahweh and the destroyer, they're kind of one and the same. But we just said they're different because the Lord passed over and didn't allow the destroyer to come in. So they're the same, but they're not the same. And you guessed it, it's the 2 powers. So some people have argued that Psalm 78 kind of complicates this, but it really doesn't. So let's look at it. All right. He gave over to their cattle to the hail and their flocks to thunderbolts. These are the plagues. He let loose on them his burning anger, wrath, indignation, and distress, a company of destroying angels. Ooh, okay. So we got a company of destroying angels here. But the Hebrew is malacharaim. That was not mashit. Malacharaim. Destroying angels. So he made a path for his anger. He did not spare them from death, but gave their lives over to the plague. Verse 51. He, who's this he? Yahweh. Struck down every firstborn in Egypt, the first fruits of their strength in the tents of Ham. Okay, so some of the commentators say, well, see, God didn't do this destroying. It was this Mashit who isn't Yahweh, or this company of destroyed angels. Well, I've already pointed out it wasn't the same Hebrew word, but we're going to look at it in more detail. So in angels, Heiser writes, the ESV's destroying angels is misleading with respect to the terminology that we're attempting to trace here. So the Hebrew term translated destroying is not the word mashit in Psalm 78, associated with the destroyer in the passages that we looked at earlier. Also, Psalm 78 doesn't say that the company of destroying angels struck down the firstborn in Egypt. Doesn't say that. Now, Yahweh may have sent a company of destroyed angels to enact the first 9 plagues. Psalm 78 seems to say that, but the death of the firstborn is attributed to him alone, to the Mashit, who is the angel of the Lord. This group of destroying angels from Psalm 78 enact the other 9 plagues, but do not act in the role of the destroyer. All right. The point is that this is the Old Testament context for what we read in Revelation chapter 6. Because here, it is the angel of the Lord, it's the risen Christ. And if you go back to Zechariah 6 for the parallel, and we said that that was probably the angel of the Lord, the destroyer, well, that's going to make a lot of sense. So look at what the Lamb does in Revelation 6. He unleashes death and plagues. Death and plagues. In Exodus, you got the Passover lamb that's slain, and the angel of the Lord is the one destroying the firstborn. So as Revelation progresses, you have the Lamb, who is Christ, who is also the destroyer. It's kind of a reversal of the Passover. Instead of the people of God having to duck the plagues in Egypt, now it's the risen Christ unleashing all of this on the enemies of the people of God. So there's a parallel, but there's also a reversal of certain elements. Okay, the point for us is that in Revelation chapter 6, the slot that would be reserved for either Yahweh or the destroyer, recall the destroying angel, who is the angel of the Lord. The point is, it's here Jesus. He's the one doing it. So this language that we're looking at here in Revelation chapter 6, this is the day of the Lord judgment. So Jesus is not the gentle Savior here. He is the destroying judge. He's the conquering king. Now, there's a lot of passages that use this divine warrior imagery of the risen Christ. And here in Revelation 6, what you have is Christ, the destroying judge. All right. 4 horsemen plagues. Are these things sequential? One, then another, then another, then another, or are they simultaneous? So, we're asking the question, are the plagues unleashed by the four horsemen sequential or simultaneous? Okay, a lot of people assume a sequence of the plagues, this one followed by that one, followed by that one, followed by that one, followed by that one. But there's an issue with that. We've already touched on it. The Zechariah 6 passage, they're going out at the same time, right? So Beale summarizes the problem. The visionary sequence of the four seals being opened could represent the sequential occurrence of each disaster one after the other, but more probably, he says, the disasters are simultaneous. And he gives a couple of reasons. The fourth seal, death in Hades, summarizes the first three seals. And the models that this is taken of from the Old Testament, Ezekiel chapter 14, verses 12 and 13, Zechariah chapter 6, verses 5 and 8, we just looked at that. And the synoptic gospels, their eschatological end-time discourse upon which Revelation chapter 6, 1 through 8 is based, they all portray the events happening simultaneously at the same time. Third, the glorified saints in Revelation chapter 6, verses 9 through 11 appear to have suffered under all four trials portrayed in the seals. So a logical pattern repeatable throughout the age is discernible. Conquest, that's the first rider, together with civil unrest, especially for persecuted Christians, the second rider, leads to famine, the third rider, and death, the fourth rider. Ezekiel chapter 14, verses 12 to 23 is also formative for this section. Those things you have those in your verses at the back of your study. So Ezekiel 14:21 is explicitly quoted in Revelation 6:8, where it functions as a general summary of the preceding trials of conquest, sword, and famine, the first two of which include death. So Ezekiel 14:21 clearly sums up the four preceding statements about trials as four evil judgments. These four evil judgments happen at once. All right, these punishments come on the nations. I'm going to slide behind. There we go. They come on the nations in general when they're unfaithful to God. These judgments come on the nations in general when they're unfaithful to God. How long have they been coming on the nations in general who are unfaithful to God? When did they start? The beginning. What beginning? We talked about this weeks back. After what event? There's a death, there's a burial, there's a resurrection, and there's a ascension when he goes into the throne room and takes the scroll and begins to open them. When did that happen? Give me a rough estimate. Round it off to millennium. 2,000 years ago. Give or take. Yeah, 2,000 years ago. AD 33, 20, what year are we in? 2024? Roughly 2,000 years ago. The four horsemen went. It's not distant future. It's already, but not yet. You guys are catching on. You're good. You're going to pass the test at the end of this thing. All right. So these punishments come on the nations. Has there been famine in nations around the world in the last 2,000 years? Has there been plagues like bubonic plague, as a third of Europe died all because of something like that? Has there been wars? Has there been death? Yeah. It's been going on, hadn't it? Okay, all right. So we're all good there? Okay. All right. These punishments, they come on the nations in general when they're unfaithful to God. The trials are a lack of bread and famine. You know, there's a big famine going on in Ethiopia right now. There was a famine down in Zambia. There's at least 200 wars going on the planet right now. Did you know that? You don't read about them, but they're happening. Tribal conflicts, wild beast, sword, death. All right, the point of Ezekiel 14:21 is that all Israelites, this is Ezekiel, Old Testament, will suffer persecution because of rampant idolatry, because of their idolatry. So the purpose of the trials is, we're talking about Ezekiel now, is to punish the majority of the nation because of its sin and simultaneously to purify the righteous remnant by testing their faith. Go back to the letters. Judgment begins first with who? House of God. Begins with us. It's to purify us. All right, so let's think about this. Scroll's got 7 seals. And if you open the first 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, how many are left? Can you open the scroll? No. Can you see what's inside it? No. Not yet. So Beale is arguing that this linear idea of the judgments, one followed by the next, just isn't a good one. Doesn't work. Besides that, the 4th seal summarizes the previous 3. And then you've got the synoptic gospels, and they don't always have the same order between Matthew, Mark, and Luke and how the judgments are going to happen. And then sometimes there's a summary statement in the gospels that occurs simultaneously. Now, he makes this comment. I'm not quite sure what he means by this. He says, in other words, you may have to wait till all the seals are open for all this stuff to explode. I think what makes sense to me, all the seals are open, what explodes is the final hour of the day of the Lord. Because the other stuff's already happening. We've already said that. Does that make sense? That's my best guess at that as I was reading that. So, we're talking already initiated, not yet fully consummated, and it's not typically the way we think about it. Sure wasn't the way we were taught. Wasn't the way I was taught in seminary. Wasn't the way you were taught at your prophecy conferences or watching prophecy on TV, right? So certain end-time systems depend on this chronological sequencing. We just kind of blew that up. All right, let's go to Revelation, verses 9 to 11. When the Lamb opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God. Remember, it's persecution, suffering. People are losing their lives, death. And for the witness they had borne. Not just car crashes. These are people losing their life for the gospel. They cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? They were each given a white robe. What's a white robe? Purity, holiness, but it's the required dress of divine council members. We're the reconstituted new divine council already, but not yet fully consummated in that role. So they were given those robes and told to rest a little longer. Oh, this is encouraging. Until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. Yeah, certain things have been marked out for you. Everybody, if you got to choose what line you were going to be in, would anybody choose that line? Imagine it'd be the short one. All right. under the altar, Revelation chapter 6, verse 9. What's the altar? What is the meaning of the altar? Okay, there's two possibilities here. Un says the tabernacle and Solomon's temple and Herod's temple had two distinct altars. There was the outer altar, or what you call the altar of burnt offerings. It was located in the court before the entrance to the holy place. So you have this court of the in the temple area, Gentiles, the court of the women, and the court of the men. Then you had the holy place, and then the most holy place. So it's before you get into the holy place. And then there's the inner altar. One's outer, this one's inner. Or it's called the golden altar of incense. And it's in front of the curtain separating the holy place from the most holy place. So you got two altars. Beale says the altar here, in association with those slain, it evokes kind of a sacrificial nature of their suffering. Remember, they suffer for the gospel. They're on mission. They're sharing their faith. They're living for Christ. So he says this altar is not that brazen altar of sacrifice. It's not the outer court altar. The better identification is with the golden altar of incense, which stood right in the vicinity of the Holy of Holies. So the sacrificial blood on the Day of Atonement was poured on this altar, and incense was burned on it. So the saints are not on the altar, they're under the altar. Okay, so they're under the altar. He says what's probably more in mind here is the virtual equation in Revelation with the Jewish writings of this altar being with the throne of God, whose sovereign purposes ultimately, here it is, it's to protect the saints. They're under the altar because we're protected. So placing the saints under the altar emphasizes divine protection over their soul. So despite the fact that you may lose your physical life, that could happen. It's happening today. It happens places all over the world. I said several weeks ago, there were more martyrs in the 20th century than the first 19 centuries combined. People who lost their lives for their faith. So you may lose your physical life. That may happen in our lifetime. Who knows? It's happening in places around the world. And because of persecution. So Beale here is arguing for this altar of incense because of its proximity to the throne, to the Ark of the Covenant, behind the veil, in the Old Testament, the Holy of Holies. And because of, he's also picking this one because of it's more, there's other Old Testament references that put this altar of incense as the more predominant one. It's the one in Yahweh's presence. All right. So Beale extrapolates to say, souls under the altar, it is our ultimate protection. If the saints are under this particular altar, this one right outside the curtain where God's throne is, even if you do lose your physical life, you're still going to be with the Lord. And that makes pretty good sense in this passage. So John here's assuming some knowledge of temple furnishings and ritual proceedings in the Old Testament. He's also repurposing that to describe the throne in Revelation 4 and 5 where the Lamb is. Okay, what's the point? Judgment is going out from this location. It is simultaneously the same location where the souls of the faithful are. They're in the presence of God. They're given white robes. That's required dress for divine council members. It's the redeemed. It's the glorified saints. They're the ones who've overcome, and they will be with the Lord forever. So John's using this imagery to create both a judgment context from the one who has the authority. Remember, he's the one who has the keys to death and Hades. So Jesus is in control of death and Hades now. So he gets to decide the severity of the judgment and where the final destination of those who are going to be judged is going to be. And if you're on his side, even if you lose your physical life in the wake of all this apocalyptic stuff, started 2,000 years ago, yes, it will get worse and worse and worse and worse, but it's already started. Be assured the Lord knows those who are his. You will be with him. And that is the message. So John's using Old Testament imagery to communicate those ideas. All right. The white robe in Revelation 6:11 is membership or belongingness for those who overcome at the end of days, at this time of trouble. The robe, required dress for divine council members. So, I'm going to pause. We're a little over halfway done with chapter 6. So I'm going to take a moment, take a couple of questions, and we'll do a stand-up break after that. Yes?
So you've got these four horsemen. How is, other than Christ and martyrs being there, how is it any different? There was famine, there was death, there was war since mankind sinned.
Yeah, so the question is, we've had famine and death and wars and judgment since the fall. So how's this any different? And it is different in that it is purposeful, unleashed by the Lamb against the nations who are oppressing and persecuting his believers. His believers still die. They're martyrs. They're dead. But it is part of the judgment on the nations for the oppression of the children of God. And so it's intensified, it's purposeful, it's already begun, it will become more and more intense. Remember birth pangs? They start out with big separation, and then I'm not a lady. You ladies tell me, how the birth pangs go?
You're right.
All right, they get a little closer together, a little more intense. Yeah, it's going to get like that. Well, I was doing some birthing in Sri Lanka this summer. I had to give birth in a dramatic skit. I thought I did it pretty well. Okay, I can't hear, sorry. We are in just a little bit. Yep. And not just today, because we're going to go back over this same stuff when we get to the trumpets. And when we get to the bowls, and when we get to Armageddon, and when we get to Gog and Magog. So
what about the believers who have died, but who were not martyred? Where are they?
They're absent with the body, present with the Lord.
But not under the altar.
We're going to see them next chapter, chapter 7, that's dense and packed full. You got that multitude from every tribe, tongue, and nation. Yeah, they're before the throne. So you got some under the throne, martyred. You got some next to the throne. We got the 144,000 too. That's next week, or 2 weeks from now. Yeah.
So if believers are going to stick around and we get to rule, who are we going to rule if everybody else is being destroyed?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's one I want to know the answer to. It's like, okay, who are we ruling over? Well, we're going to rule over angels. So, and by the time you get to that part, that time in the New Testament when Paul's writing that, angels has just become a generic term for Elohim in the Old Testament and Theos in the New Testament, which are spiritual beings. There will be, there's been hierarchy in God's economy all along. I imagine there'll be some hierarchy in heaven. There are passages that say your faithfulness today will determine some of your rewards and position in heaven, in a sense. So, if you think, oh, I got my insurance policy, I don't care, I'm a believer, I just do what I want because I'm in. Okay, well, you might be in cleaning the toilets and, I don't know. Good enough. That's good enough. Well, great. I want to be king. So I have that same question. It's like, okay, and when you get to Revelation 22 and it doesn't let in the liars and the cheats, and it says these, so it's like, okay, where are they that they could get in the first place? I mean, I have some questions. All right, next. Ask me something else I can't answer.
Okay.
Oh, this is a challenge. Larry's taking it on.
You want to talk a little bit about the fact that he looked and when the fifth seal was opened and saw the souls of those who have been killed? What is the nature of the soul?
Well, it's just their immaterial body. Their bodies, their physical bodies aren't in the throne room. They're in the ground. So it's their immaterial body.
But he can see them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, he could see the other Elohim. They don't have bodies either. So, yeah. I can answer that one. I don't know if it's true. I just made it up. Now, I think that's it. All right. By the way, so I just came back from Prague, Czech Republic, and I have jet lag. You know what that means? My filter's gone. It's like truth serum. You want to know anything? You want to know what I'm really thinking? Just ask me now. Honey, don't ask. Because I'll tell you. Okay. 5 minutes stand-up break. So if my cameraman's ready, we're ready to get going. So we're going to move on. We are moving on to verses 12 to 17. Here John writes, when he had opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood, and the stars fell from the sky to the earth as a fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Okay, let me just stop there for a second and ask you a question. Does this sound like the end of the world? How many times does our world end? We're only in chapter 6. What's the point of the next chapters? Okay, let's keep going. Then the kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. What mountains? There are no mountains. They've already been removed. What? How are you hiding in the rocks of the mountains where there are no more mountains? Okay, we'll just keep reading.
No, they were just removed.
They're gone. Calling the mountains that have been removed and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who's seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come. I said their wrath. The one seated on the throne. Remember, Ancient of Days is on the throne, but the Lamb's not on the throne. He's up walking around. He's not seated till Revelation chapter 22. So there's two of them, and who can stand? Okay, guys, this sixth seal, which has not happened yet. Newsflash, the mountains are still here. You're still alive. Sixth seal hadn't happened yet. But John amalgamates several Old Testament passages. In fact, he's just throwing everything in the Old Testament into the blender. Beale writes, The judgment of the world is depicted with stock in trade Old Testament imagery for the dissolution of the cosmos. This is decreation imagery. It only gets decreated one time. Or let's say he could decreate it 20 times, but after the first time, who's left alive? So this portrayal is based on a mosaic of Old Testament passages that are brought together because of the cosmic metaphors of judgment that they have in common. So the query of text from which the description has been drawn is in the yellow up on the slide. It's Isaiah 13, 24, 19, 34, Ezekiel 32, Joel 2. A lot of passages out of Joel. Joel 3, Habakkuk 3. Plus allusions to Amos, to Jeremiah, to Psalm 68. The same Old Testament texts are also influential in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and in Acts chapter 2. Pentecost. In other words, John is mining all these Old Testament passages because they all have apocalyptic flavoring in the Old Testament. And they're getting repurposed here in Revelation chapter 6. They also get repurposed in the synoptic gospel accounts, in those apocalyptic passages, the Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke, and in the book of Acts chapter 2, 19, 20, about the inauguration of the new covenant, the covenant of the Holy Spirit, where he quotes Joel. Beale states, but the most formative influence among these texts is Isaiah chapter 34 and verse 4, after which Revelation chapter 6 verses 13 to 14 has most clearly been patterned. Here's Isaiah 34. Draw near, O nations, to hear, and give attention, O peoples. Let the earth hear, and all that fills it, the world and all that comes from it. For the Lord is enraged against all the nations, and furious against all their host. Their host. Their host. Stand up and dance with me. Their host. Their host. Their host is the most. Okay, this is where you get both the judgment of the powers on earth, and also their host, the powers in heaven, the spiritual world. That is the key phrase, their host. So God is angry at the nations that are persecuting his people, his believers, and he's angry at their host. Okay, you've been in here long enough. Some of you have done Between Two Edens. Who are the host? The watchers, the Elohim, the rebellious sons of God put over the nations at Babel, right? Verse 31. He has, devoted them to destruction. We covered this in Between Two Edens. Karim. It's the Karim language of the conquest back in the days of Moses and Joshua. He's given them over for slaughter. Their slain shall be cast out, and the stench of their corpses shall rise. The mountains shall flow with their blood, and all the host of heaven shall rot away. Who are these hosts of heaven? Rebellious supernatural beings. That's who they are, rebellious supernatural. All the host of heaven shall rot away. Psalm 82, the judgment of the supernatural beings. And the skies roll up like a scroll, and all their host shall fall. So there it is again. Their host shall fall. They're going to fall as leaves fall from the vine, like leaves falling from a fig tree. Their host shall fall like leaves from a fig tree. You know, we're talking about metaphor here. These are not the literal sky. These are not the stars in the sky. It's not planets. All right. So if you do a search for Tsevaam, which is translated their host, the singular is Tsava, and it refers to an army or a group or the host of heaven. So it could be an army, it could be a group, or it could be the host of heaven. Now the host of heaven are celestial objects, celestial beings. But Tsevaam, their host, with the plural suffix attached to it, if you do a search specifically on that word, with the plural form, with the suffix, every single time it's used in the Hebrew Bible, it speaks of celestial objects, not earthly armies. It's only celestial objects, and it's celestial beings, rebellious, supernatural beings. So, Isaiah 34 in the Septuagint, we have, and the powers. So, instead of their host, it's the powers. Dunamis is the word. Okay? Powers. Who uses the word powers in the New Testament? Paul uses the word powers in the New Testament. What's he talking about? Elohim, or theos would be the Greek term, which is the equivalent of the Hebrew Elohim. Theos is translated God in the New Testament. Elohim's translated God in the Old Testament. So Paul's going to use this for supernatural powers of darkness. And the powers of the heavens will melt. So the rebellious supernatural beings of the heavens will melt. And the heaven will be rolled up like a scroll. And all the stars, okay, what have we learned about stars? Elohim, supernatural, they're spiritual beings. When the ancients saw stars, they saw spiritual beings. So the stars will fall as leaves fall from a fig tree. But here we're talking in the context supernatural, rebellious beings. Right? So in Revelation chapter 6, verse 13 to 14, John is using the Septuagint, and he says, the stars of the heaven fell to the earth as a fig cast its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind, and the heaven was split as a scroll having been rolled up. So John's pulling a little bit here from Isaiah chapter 34. He's looping in some other passages, bringing those in. But he's thinking about a celestial catastrophe. The celestial language in the Old Testament and Second Temple Jewish thought, Second Temple 500 BC, 70 AD, is not always, but it is frequently used of supernatural powers. And that is certainly the way Isaiah 34:4 is using it. And it's adding additional thought here to the human armies that we've already seen earlier in the passage. All right, so God's going to judge human armies, He's going to judge humans, and celestial beings at the day of the Lord. The human powers oppressing God's people are going to get what's coming to them. Human powers who are oppressing God's people will get what's coming to them. But so will the spiritual powers who are oppressing, manipulating, causing chaos in our world are going to get what's coming to them. Now notice I said at the day of the Lord. So here we are at the end of history. It's chapter 6. And we're already at the end of the world. The supernatural powers are judged. It's over. It's done with. Human people are judged. It's over. It's done with. So why doesn't the letter just end right here? Why don't we just have the new heavens and new earth in chapter 7 and be done with this? Well, what do we do with the rest of the book? Do we split it and go, no, that happens, but then there's more into the world, and then there's more into the world, and then we'll have some more into the world? Or do we harmonize it and go, we're just going to recycle this material and tell it a different way? What did you guys decide last week? Are you splitters or harmonizers? Yeah, I'm going to have to clean up some stuff Lisa and Don told you. Do you have a couple more hours? Because I watched the video. They did an awesome job. All right. Isaiah 34:5. For my sword has drunk its fill, where? In the heavens. Behold, it descends for judgment upon Edom. Where's Edom? On the earth. So where'd the sword start? In the heavens. Then it descends to the earth. Upon the people I have devoted to destruction. Some will tell you, Jesus is coming back. Everybody's just going to bow the knee. There's not going to be bloodshed. Devoted to destruction. Sword. Our friends at the Bible Project, the video you watch, it's a lot of love at the end. Not so sure that's what that's saying. Who sings Bloody Sunday? Is that you two? Yeah, I think it's more Bloody Sunday. Yeah. All right, the Isaiah passage has the sword of the Lord judgment in the heavenly realm. Then it is judgment upon the physical realm. Interesting. Judgment of the heavenly beings first, then judgment of earthly beings. All right. The phrase, stars fell from heaven, in verse 13. Well, let's look that up, Matthew 24. Somebody said, are we going to go to Matthew? Matthew 24:29. Here it is. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened. Ooh, sounds familiar. And the moon will not give its light. Okay, blood red, no moon. And the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers, rebellious supernatural beings of the heavens will be shaken. Mark 13:25. The stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. This is Paul's language. Rulers, powers, principalities, spiritual forces of this dark age. Isaiah 34 plays an important role here. See, a lot of end-time systems are thinking only about earthly armies. It's Russia, it's China. But some of this language, it just goes way beyond that. Because the Septuagint, Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible of Isaiah 34:4, translates the Hebrew, all their host, tsevaam, with dunamis, powers. So their host, it's not the earthly armies and their host, earthly host, it's supernatural host. It's powers. All right, this is Art and Gingrich, a lexicon. Dunamis is a term that can describe a personal transcendent spirit or heavenly agent. I want to make sure I'm on the right slide for you. There we go. Because this language in Greek includes that semantic interpretation, because he's drawn specifically from Isaiah chapter 34, verse 4, when you go to Revelation 6:13 and 14, he talks about stars falling. He's not talking about an asteroid catastrophe. This is not something NASA can defeat. You probably saw the movie Armageddon. They shot a rocket and they landed on the asteroid and they blew it up. This isn't going to work here. It's not what we're talking about. This is not Deep Impact. I love those movies, but that ain't what's happening here. So you and I have to drop the uber literalism. 1,000 years, it's 1,000. Said this many days, it's got to be that many days. We're talking metaphor. So we're talking about the judgment of the cosmic powers of darkness, along with suffering and apocalyptic violence on the earth. The two things go together. In the heavens, on the earth. It's going to get bad. It's going to end everything. It's decreation. It's the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. Last time I was here, I walked you through that. It's a Daniel 10 worldview. So behind the powers on earth, there are these supernatural powers that are manipulating them, that are steering them to the ends to which they want. They're chaos agents. They're at work today. They're probably hanging out in here. Rebuke them. All right, if Revelation is describing the judgment of human powers that are persecuting believers, would you think that John would just want to leave out the judgment of the fallen gods of the Old Testament? No, of course not. The corrupt sons of God, Psalm 82, the princes of the nation, Daniel 10. He's not leaving those guys out here. He knows it. He sees it. And by virtue of all his allusions to the Old Testament here, he's tracking with it. All right, fallen stars language. How about a little bit more, in case you're not convinced? All right, this fallen stars language, it's used in Second Temple Jewish literature of supernatural powers and rebellion. It's not just the Septuagint of Isaiah 34:4, but all these Enoch passages. All of these use the phrasing falling stars of the watchers. Where do we get the watchers from? Daniel chapter 4. In the Second Temple Jewish literature, the watchers are the ones who came down on Mount Hermon, impregnated women, made the Nephilim. It's those guys. Supernatural powers and rebellion. Or fallen gods of the nations, the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11 guys. They're still in play. So Nicholsburg, in his commentary on 1 Enoch, says this. 1 Enoch 86, stars are an image for the watchers. In Daniel chapter 12, verse 3, and in 1 Enoch 104:2, stars and angels can even be identified with one another. When 1 Enoch 18 speaks of transgressing stars, it is alluding to a variation on the myth of the rebellion of the watchers that's written about in 1 Enoch. Well, guess what? You also get this wandering star language in the New Testament. So wandering stars is not a NASA issue. It's not a U.S. Air Force issue. We're not going to blow it out of the sky. It is language that describes supernatural powers in rebellion, enemies of the people of God. And Isaiah 34 hits on both of those things. So it's describing an eschatological judgment, an end-time judgment that includes the gods of the nations, akin to Psalm 82, along with human powers. So in light of all this, it's going to be unwise for us to assume that what John describes here in Revelation is a meteor shower or an asteroid impact or some other literal astronomical cataclysm. It's just not what he's talking about. This is the judgment of the supernatural powers. So, one more time, hope you're asking yourself, all right, if the rebellious supernatural powers are now judged, if the human realm is now already judged, if the creation's just been decreated, what's left for the trumpets and bowls to do? Now, you can hold to your system, your end time system with your charts. I can pop one up that, this happens and then this and then this, and at the seventh seal, a telescope pops out and you got 7 trumpets, and then you get to the 7th trumpet, another telescope pops out and you got 7 bowls, and it's one after another, linear. Could be it. And you own your interpretation. You own what you're going to hold to. I'm just asking you to consider there may be something different that John's saying. Okay. So, rebellious supernatural beings have been judged. Rebellious human armies have been judged. The earth is toast. But we'll get to the new creation in about 15 chapters. All right. Beale writes this, the reference, oh, get this, the reference to stars, mountains, and islands as symbols of human, did you get that? Human or divine powers in the LXX. The LXX is the Septuagint, Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. The Jewish writings and Apocalypse itself. So there are examples of stars, mountains, and islands being used as symbols for humans or divine powers in Jewish writings, in the Septuagint, and in the Apocalypse. So this is the Apocalypse. Revelation is the Apocalypse. Point to a figurative interpretation of these things. Right? Mountains disappearing, humans disappear, supernatural beings disappear. You get it? How many times are you going to disappear? Once or 5 times? Because we're going to go over it again. They're going to disappear again. Then we're going to go over it again. They're going to disappear again. Then we're going to go over it again. They're going to disappear again. It's like a magic show. He's like, here. All right. So, now, where he says figurative interpretation, we've been using the term metaphorical because a metaphor depends on something that is literally real. When Scripture uses a metaphorical or symbolic or figurative language, the point is not we're talking about something that is less than real. The point is we're talking about something that is more than real in a physical, earthly sense. So metaphors are based on reality. Stars, mountains, islands are a metaphor. This is your this equals this, by the way. This one's not in your answer key. I need to go back and add it because I forgot to put this one in. Stars, mountains, islands, metaphor equals human or divine powers. It's not actual planets and stars falling out of the sky. It's not mountains. It's not islands. It's humans, supernatural powers. All right. Oh, astral prophecy. We love this. It gets really complicated. We had it with Ezekiel 1. We had it with the 24 deacons. We had it with the throne, how it's hovering over the constellations as they're spinning in the wheels with the eyes and the stars. And there's a lot of astral prophecy in the book of Revelation. This guy, Bohl, Sattler, and Molina remind us, you know what? There was a constellation called the Altar. It's located in the southern sky in the Milky Way. Then he quotes some Greek and some Latin classical text. And Bohl considers the souls that are clothed in white under the altar to be stars in the Milky Way, over which the altar constellation is situated, just as was the case with the 24 elders. There exists this astral interpretation. Now, Un's going to reference these scholars. In the astral interpretation, you've got the altar. Underneath it, you've got this series of stars. And, you know, stars is used elsewhere in the Bible and outside the Bible for celestial beings and or for believers who have been glorified. So it's supernatural beings or believers who are glorified. We will become like them. We're going to become like Jesus. We will be as the stars of the sky. So I'm just pointing that out here. It's on the table. Could be that John's using astral prophecy here. So in Bohl's mind, John is doing that. He's using astral prophecy to communicate. By the way, it's the same communication. Believers are secure. You're going to be glorified. You're going to be with the Lord forever. You're going to be part of this divine council among the stars. So the theological endpoints, same place. You end up same place. It's just what metaphorical strategy is John using to communicate this idea? These guys, Bohl and Molina and some others, they opt for the astral interpretation. Whether you go astral or you go Old Testament, LXX, doesn't matter. You end up at the same place. So it's a matter of which metaphors is John drawing on to communicate this set of ideas? Do I choose Old Testament antecedents and metaphors and symbols and verses? Or do I choose astral metaphors and Second Temple stuff that uses that kind of content. Oh, you're going to love this. Do I choose one or the other? Or is it both and? Could it be? Don't you just love that? John can be doing both at the same time. He can be moving from one to the other. He can be using this, or he can be using that, or he can be using the other one, or he can be using a combination of all of them. There's just a lot of this stuff floating around in John's head. And he's just picking freely the way he chooses to describe these things. Okay, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying John did not see certain things in a vision. He's recording now the things he saw in the vision. But remember, he's not in a trance seeing the stuff, writing while he's seeing it. He's going back and reflecting and think, okay, how do I communicate to, not to you guys. He didn't write this to you. You know that, right? He didn't write this to you. He didn't write to the 21st century or the 17th century or the 5th century or the 35th century if we go that long, if the Lord tarries. He wrote it to people in those 7 churches in the 1st century, right? Okay, so Revelation chapter 4 and 5 is describing that glorified believers are part of this divine council. Then an astral point of reference could be another layer here to John's thinking. But if we isolate the meaning of Revelation's altar to only the astral prophecy or prophetic view, that thinking goes way too far. But the same can be said for eliminating it altogether. It is a possibility. And we're going to see more of this as we proceed through the book of Revelation, because we're going to go back over the same stuff. So we've seen it once, we'll see it again, right? There's going to be places where this astral stuff is going to give us some real clarity. In fact, chapter 12, jam-packed with astral prophecy. But you got to wait till spring for that. So some of this astral stuff might give us some real clarity. So that's Revelation chapter 6. Obviously, John's dipping into Old Testament stuff with specific references to the altar, to Zechariah's horses, to the chariots. He's also referencing some Old Testament concepts like the celestial judgment of the fallen gods, rebellious supernatural beings. Like the divine warrior motif, who is now the Lamb, both sacrificial metaphor, conquering king. All these things are drawn from the Old Testament. They frame what John is trying to communicate and describe in terms of what he's shown. And the more of this stuff that we know, the more apt we will be to not try to parse these things in light of our modern metaphors or the daily newspaper. Oh, you see what's happening in Israel? Must be Revelation. No, doesn't work that way. Because Revelation was written to a specific audience at a specific time. The people who are reading it need to understand it. They're the ones the letter was written to. So, I want to encourage you to resist trying to be Lucky Charms leprechauns. Looking for Lucky Charms under every 4-leaf clover because they're magically delicious. There are no clues for you today in the letter. But wait, that could be, the mark of the beast could be that. I'll tell you what the mark of the beast is when we get there. Stop looking for 21st century clues that are magically delicious. They're not there. Neither were 17th century clues or 14th century clues or 29th century clues. It was written so people who got the letter could understand it. So let's just extrapolate on that for a second. Let's talk about creation. We love to talk about creation, evolution, all that stuff. Guess what? When Moses wrote that 3,500 years ago, there was no theory of evolution. There were no quantum physics or mechanics. It's not in the text. Those people would have never understood that. Yeah, but this science thing, and I talked to this physics professor, and I saw this YouTube video. Great, it's not in the text. Those people weren't asking that question. Here's a simple idea. Let's read the text in its context. All these things that we talked about today are part of the first century context or earlier that he was drawing from. So let's draw on the things that John draws from. And John's not going to limit himself from where he picks from, so we shouldn't either. Okay, cookies. All right, so we've got the lamb imagery. Remember, two things, some ruling God, power, might, conquering king. It's also sacrificial imagery. We got that piece. 4 horsemen comes from Ezekiel 6, which references, Zechariah 6, which references Zechariah 1. The 4 corners of the earth. It's 4 chariot teams. Chariot teams are instruments of war. It goes to all points of the compass. This is global. It's global judgment. Angel of Yahweh, the angel of the Lord, the destroying angel, the visible Yahweh. It's Jesus. He's the destroying angel. He's the one who unleashes the wrath. First 4 seals, simultaneous judgments. We drew that from Zechariah 6, from Ezekiel 14, the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. The altar. It's the one next to the curtain of the Holy of Holies, the altar of incense. It provides ultimate protection spiritually. It's divine protection for those who have kept their believing loyalty, who have persevered to the end, who have overcome, who have conquered, who have not gone away and followed other supernatural beings, not chased after other gods, not denied their faith, not turned their back on Yahweh. All right, white robe, membership or belongingness for those who overcome at the end of days in this time of trouble. Robe, required dress for divine council members. We had that earlier in the letter. Their host, Tsevaam, can be an army, can be a group, can be a host of heaven, celestial beings, but this particular usage is always, when it's the singular, just there we go. Tseva, without the no am on it, it can be all those things. When you put the am, it's only celestial beings. Dunamis, it's a personal, transcendent spirit and heavenly agent. Paul uses it for rebellious supernatural powers. Falling stars are rebellious supernatural beings. Rebellious, corrupt sons of God. The powers, the principalities, the celestial language in Old Testament and in Second Temple Jewish literature. Frequently, it's used of supernatural powers. It's the celestial, this is fallen stars, it's celestial judgment. It's Psalm 82 judgment. It's Isaiah 34:4. It's Matthew 24:29 and Mark 13:25. So, these are not planets coming out of the sky. It's a judgment of supernatural rebellious beings. So stars falling from heaven, just what I said, judgment of supernatural, rebellious, corrupt sons of God. Astral interpretation of souls clothed in white. It's the stars in the Milky Way over the altar constellation. Celestial is really what it's saying. We're the stars. It's either celestial beings or believers who may have been glorified. Let's see. Yep. That is it. So, couple of minutes. questions? Yes?
So where did the aliens come in?
The aliens. You know, interesting, some of the stuff we get from Heiser, he's on his website, he loves like alien stuff and science fiction. I would encourage you to go to his website and read. Maybe he's got something. I've heard some of the things that people think are aliens could just be supernatural beings doing their thing, but I don't know. That's beyond me. Yep.
So if these beings are rebellious, supernatural, why are they in heaven? Or is that just another?
Yeah, so in the ancient view, there's a three-tiered cosmology. There's the heavens, that's the spiritual realm. There's the earth, it's the physical realm, and there's the under the earth, which is where the dead go, Sheol. So you're either a supernatural being in the heavenly realm, you're a human in the physical realm, or planet, animal, earth, or you're under the earth, you're dead. That's their worldview.
That makes sense. I was just like, wait, why are they in heaven?
Yeah, they are not part of God's entourage. They're not part of God's family team. They have been cast out. They are separate. They're in rebellion and they're oppositional. But they're going to be judged. Psalm 82, it ends with their judgment. Yeah. Yes. Those who have no believing loyalty in Him, who've given their loyalty elsewhere, whether it's divine beings or human beings, they all die. No one gets out alive, Caleb. Everybody dies.
So let's talk about their concept of the cosmos. When they looked up and saw stars, even the Milky Way, they had no concept at all of how far away that was, right?
Probably not. So my guess is no, but I can't climb in their mind. I don't know exactly. And you were talking about a generality, not individuals. But what they thought, when they saw stars, they knew they moved in the sky. They knew that was the heavens. They believed in a supernatural. They were intimately aware of the supernatural realm. So they thought they either represented spiritual beings, or some of the writings indicate some thought were spiritual beings.
Getting past the spiritual or supernatural, thinking about the physical, but their concept of the cosmos. They had, I don't think, like you said, there was, when Moses was writing, a lot of stuff that had no concept of.
Right. No telescopes,
Right. I don't think
no
they
Hubble.
Right. I don't think they had any concept of how big
No.
the universe was.
They didn't have any idea of the Earth's place in it. They thought the Earth was the center of everything. Writings about the world tree, Jerusalem's the center of everything. We covered a lot of this in Between Two Edens, the tree that goes from underworld to the physical realm up into the heavens.
Right.
So
So to talk about what did you call it?
decreation.
Decreation. To me, it's a hard thing to think that the decreation is going to be the entire universe, as opposed to a decreation of the cosmos that was familiar to the ancients.
Yeah, I mean their cosmos. So does their cosmos that they could see with the naked eye, because they didn't have city lights that kept them from seeing stars. I remember one time in Uganda coming out of dinner where there was a blackout. So I walked out of the building, looked up, and it's like, oh my goodness, see these lights right here? I thought the stars were like right there, and they were that big, and it was just like blanket covered the sky. I'd never seen that in my life before, because I'm always used to the pollution of light around. It was like, I thought I could touch them. It was wild. So I don't know, this universe, cosmos, I think we're not talking about the physical stars and stuff. Now, when you get to 2 Peter and he talks about elements melting, that's a different passage. So that could be talking, and I'm thinking that hits a different aspect. All right, time for one more. Going once, going twice. I do this in life group for prayer. Going thrice. Lord God, thank you for this evening. Thank you for giving us insight into how you're going to bring judgment to this world, finally redeem your believers, instill us as a reconstituted divine council, and bring judgment against those supernatural beings who have wreaked havoc and chaos in our world, going back to the very beginning. We love you and we appreciate you, and keep us safe till we join together again in 2 weeks. In Jesus' name, amen.